When it comes to chalking your foul lines, bridging is a common problem. Bridging occurs when chalk settles and compacts in the hopper and literally bridges across the agitator. If your chalk bridges, you'll get uneven flow, and the result will be poor, spotty lines. You can prevent bridging. You want to avoid the vibrations that are bound to occur when transporting your chalker across grass and can lead to settling and compaction. So fill your chalker next to the field you'll be chalking and only fill what you need for one field, waiting to add more chalk when you get to the next field.
All right, now when it comes time to get your chalker ready to chalk, the one thing we have to do is try to fill our chalker as close to where we're going to put down the line as possible. Why is that? Because the biggest problem that most groundskeepers have with operating a chalker is having problems with the chalk hanging up in the hopper, okay? Most of that is due to the chalk compacting in the hopper. Many people think it's moisture, but in most cases it's because of compaction. Remember, this is a crushed stone. And when you crush a stone, it crushes angularly. So you have all these angular particles. When we pour the chalk in here, we put a lot of air into it as well, so it floats or it flows very easily. But then as that chalk sits in there and as you rattle the chalker along the ground, the vibration allows those particles to slowly come together and mechanically interlock, and that causes bridging. So we want to fill the chalker as close to the area where we're going to apply it as possible. That reduces the chance of that bridging occurring in this hopper. Okay, so I like to put this in a bucket here, and we'll just take our scoop. And the other thing we want to do is we only want to put in as much chalk as we think we're going to need for this field. Again, if you fill this up for 2 fields, you'll do this field, go off to the next field, and the problem is over the course of that time you get a lot of compaction occurring as the settling occurs in this hopper, and then you're going to get bridging. So again, only put in as much chalk in here as you need for 1 field. So we're going to plop this in, and if you want to, you can feather it to add more air to it. That's always going to help it flow. It's not going to guarantee that it's not going to bridge, but it's sure going to reduce that chance. All right. Typically for a 90-foot diamond, it really only takes about 30 to 35 pounds of chalk. This is a 35-pound hopper, so we should have plenty here to do what we need to do.
If you're lining your field with an aerosol sprayer, it's pretty simple. Just shake the can for a minute or two to thoroughly stir the paint, invert the can, and mount it to your paint striper. For bulk paint, you need to dilute it with water based on the manufacturer's recommendation. If you dilute it too much, you'll get a less vivid paint line. Use a strainer when you're pouring the paint into your sprayer. The strainer will catch any contaminants and help prevent clogging. Unlike your chalker, you want to fill your sprayer away from the field in case of spills.
All right, when using aerosol paints, you want to make sure that you shake it long enough so you can hear the marbles shaking around it. That's the stir that's going to agitate this to make sure the paint is nice and fully mixed inside the can. Make sure it tumbles in there for at least 2 minutes. If the paint can is old, more than a year, you want to make sure you maybe double that time. If you're using bulk paint, such as this here, make sure you follow the manufacturer's directions on the label as far as how much you can dilute it to. If you go above or over the amount of dilution rate that they recommend, the paint probably is not going to adhere to the grass fairly well. So if it says the maximum dilution rate is 12 to 1, then you can't go 13 to 1 or 14 to 1, obviously, or you're going to have problems with that paint adhering to the grass. So Chris here is mixed up, or he's getting ready to mix up some paint in our sprayer here. And what he's done here is he's got his water already in place. This particular paint goes into solution fairly easily, but we want to make sure we strain that paint through the strainer here first to make sure we catch any dry flakes or any kind of chunks that might be in that paint. So Chris goes ahead, he pours the paint in, turns the pump on, and that agitates the unit and gets the paint all mixed up into one nice homogeneous blend. Now, some paint sprayers don't have the luxury of being able to add the paint right into the machine like this. Many of the older machines require that you mix it first and then dump it into the container, or in other words, dilute it first with water and then dump it into the hopper. But this particular paint goes into solution real nice and easy. So once that's all set up and ready to go, we're ready to go out on the field and paint.
Before you put down your foul lines, there's something you should do first. Apply water. If you are chalking, a little moisture will get wicked up into the chalk, which will help lock the line in place, protecting from wind and improving its durability. When painting, the paint sprayer itself will have a blowing effect, and the moisture will help seal down top dressing and soil while you're painting. Remember, the foul line should be entirely in fair territory, so the foul edge should align with the foul edge of the base. Make sure you position your chalker so its guide aligns correctly with the string line. Click the pictures to see what we mean. Make sure you maintain a slow, steady pace while chalking so you have even distribution of chalk and as straight a line as possible.
Okay, with your hopper filled and ready to go to apply chalk, all we need to do is get our chalker in place and line it up on the string line according to how we're going to use the guides. This particular unit, I'm going to use the wheel as my guide to put the chalk down. Depends on what unit you're using as far as what you're going to use to guide it. But get your chalker in line and then go ahead and set your unit to the desired amount of chalk you want to drop. This particular unit allows us to put varying amounts down depending on how the chalk flows. And then go ahead and walk a nice straight steady line using that string line and watching to make sure that that chalk is falling in the right position. All right, with that chalk line down and in place, we'll take and we'll put our base back in. See how that foul line lined up? That's just about right. The chalk edge here ends at the base. Remember, all the chalk line on a foul line is in fair territory, just like the base. So we want the edge of the foul line matching up with the edge of the base.
Just like the chalker, position your paint striper so the guide discs on the side align with the string line, with the resulting foul line entirely in fair territory. Keep a steady pace as you walk up the line. When you reach the grass, make sure it's dry. It's better to paint on dry grass if possible. If you have to paint on damp or wet grass, it is better to use an aerosol that will ensure the paint sticks to the grass. Make sure you adjust your sprayer nozzle to the appropriate height when painting on grass, so the spray is just wide enough to cover the full width between your guide discs. For cold to near freezing temperatures, keep the aerosols warming in a 5-gallon bucket filled with hot water until you are ready to paint.
With our string line ready and the base line wetted down to help keep the soil and top dressing from moving too much from the pressure of the paint squirting down, we can now begin our painting process down the line. We'll use the string line as a guide and keep the guide dishes that are on the side of this painting machine just barely touching that string line, because we don't want to be moving that string line. Obviously, it's going to distort our line if we do, so we keep that string line just a little bit away from that disc. And that should keep everything all true and straight. Now you'll notice that I maintain a nice steady pace. If I get too herky-jerky, I'm going to get spots where the paint's going to pool, maybe spread out a little bit, so on and so forth. But as we look down this line, it's a pretty straight line. I'm pretty happy with that. Nice, neat lines. A lot of people are going to paint foul lines now because of the easier cleanup than what chalk is consumes with you. But this turned out a really nice line. All right, before we go out and paint our line now on the turf, the one thing we want to make sure of is that we've got the right width of a line and that the nozzle is properly positioned so that we get the full line painted between our guide discs. So in order to make a wider line, obviously we'll widen out these discs, or narrower, we'll push them in, made by a simple adjustment on the unit here. And then once we made that adjustment, then we want to make sure we raise or lower the nozzle here to make sure that the width of that fan is just a little bit wider than these discs. So it's just painting the side of these discs just a little bit down near the base. Once that's all set, then you're ready to go ahead and spray that line. If you have to paint foul lines on grass when the grass is wet, say from heavy morning dew, or you've just had a rainfall and you absolutely need to get those foul lines out, you might want to think about using aerosol paint instead of the bulk paints that you mix with water. Those paints don't adhere to the grass as well if the grass is wet versus the aerosol paints. Aerosol paints will adhere to that wet grass much better and will kind of save the day for you in those really tough situations where you've got to get that line down and the grass is wet. If you're stuck painting grass in the late fall or in the early spring when temperatures are really cold and the viscosity of the paint just isn't working for you, you're better off using aerosol paints. Take the aerosol paint cans and plunge them into a bucket of hot water and keep them there until you're absolutely ready to use them and spray them. That'll keep the temperature of the paint warm enough and the viscosity loose enough so that it will flow more easily out of the paint nozzles and apply nicely onto your grass.